Hey everyone, welcome back to the Out of Spec podcast. Hope you're doing well today. Today I am going to be speaking with Dominic, who runs the Batteries Included podcast that you might be familiar with. If you're not, definitely go check it out. They do a live episode every Friday, and then they have interviews throughout the week. They also have a battery bargains episode where you can kind of submit your scenario and they can give you advice of what electric vehicle might be right for you. And of course, Max from the Out of Spec team, who you probably know and love. And we're going to talk to them about their Race to Vegas experience in the Kia EV9, the one that I got to drive around in Colorado for about a week when I was there this past month. So let's plug in to hear how the EV9 did not only racing, but with their software and route planning abilities on the way back from Las Vegas to Fort Collins.
This episode is made possible by the support we get from Fort Collins Kia. If you are in the market for any electric Kia, not only do they never add market adjustments, they will deliver your car to you anywhere in the 48 contiguous states for out-of-spec viewers. More information in the link in the show notes.
Okay, everyone, before we settle in with Dominic and Max, I did want to tell you a little bit about the Kia EV9. I did get to drive it, like I said, and I thought it was a great car. It immediately gave me soccer mom vibes because of it seemed durable. That was one thing that it seemed really important. Of course, it had like the weather guards and everything in the on the floors, but it was also so roomy, and I'm kind of a short person, but I could see all the way out, no blind spots really, all the way out the back, and it was really comfortable to drive in a way. I didn't really get the seat to be super comfortable, but I thought it was a nice ride, and there's a lot of benefits to this EV9. When it comes to racing to Vegas, maybe not the best, but it's not the best strengths for racing, but I think for a family, it could be a great option. It can fit up to 7 adults, of course, 3-row SUV. It has a pretty flat charging curve, and it had the highest voltage of all the cars that went on the Race to Vegas trip, which was the Rivian R1S, the Mercedes EQS, and the Tesla Model X, and then, of course, the Kia EV9. The one that they took was the full range spec called the Light Long Range, and it was loaned from Fort Collins Kia, who you hear about a lot on the podcast. They are generous in loaning us that for 6 months, and luckily I got to drive it as well. The software and the preconditioning features in this car is definitely not its strength, so that will certainly factor in when you're trying to get somewhere quickly, charge really fast, and race yourself to Vegas. But by far, it has the cheapest MSRP of all of the options that were on this trip. As you can see here, it has a EPA estimated range of about 304 miles or 270 miles at a lowest. It says it can charge up to 10 to 80% with 350 kilowatt DC fast charging in 24 minutes. It does hold over 200 kilowatt charging speeds to over 80% state of charge, which is crazy cool charging. When Colton, we covered his really cheap lease of an EV6 recently, and we went out riding around in it and we charged it, because that's what we do. Hey, look at how this car charges. Crazy numbers, crazy speeds I was seeing. What Kia is doing with their EVs and their charging abilities is really cool. And right here, you can see 2024 EV9 has a starting MSRP at $54,000, almost $55,000, which is pretty cool for a 3-row electric SUV. You might not get all the features with the base model, but it's not too shabby. Okay, now let us invite Max and Dominic onto the podcast so they can tell us all about not only their strategy of getting this SUV to Vegas as fast as they could and how they did, but also just leaving it up to fate and using the Kia EV9 route planner to get all the way back from Vegas to Fort Collins. Let's go.
But okay, I am now joined by Max and Dominic, who were the two people that were piloting the EV9, the electric SUV that I also had the pleasure of driving for a week recently, from Colorado to Vegas and then back from Las Vegas to Colorado. But it was two different approaches definitely along your road trip from racing to Vegas to fully putting your maybe not your trust, but your at least experimental attitude into the EV9 route planner to see exactly what it did to get you from Las Vegas to Colorado. So thank you both for being here. I'd love to first start off by just getting your feedback on the EV9 in general as a road tripper, because I think that's something important. But yeah, welcome back, everyone. Dominic, Max, thank you for being here.
Hey, Francie. Hey, Max. Good to see you. It's been a while.
Yeah, and less stressful circumstances this time.
Right. So like last time we were racing we raced to Vegas is like an 800-mile race from Fort Collins, Colorado, all the way down to Las Vegas, Nevada. Mostly along I-70, I guess. This big chunk of the thing is along I-70, which is a crazy road. So the way down, like you mentioned, was kind of a race. So we were with racing against three other teams in the EV9, Kia EV9, and we were trying to optimize, the speed of the trip. Basically, that was the approach to getting down there. And then on the way back, we followed the route planner for all the four vehicles we had. So we just followed exactly what the route planner would tell us, sort of to emulate what maybe a new buyer might do if they just jumped into the thing and said, "Take me to Las Vegas," I guess, or Fort Collins, Colorado, I guess in this case, to be more accurate.
Right. And Max, what do you think is the significance of letting it play out like this from, okay, we're going to just put in the final destination and see what happens?
Like Dom said, this is how a buyer would experience the car if they don't watch the Out of Spec podcast and reviews and all our content, and they're not an EV nerd, or they don't use a better route planner, which also is used by EV nerds typically. They're just getting their car and using it as designed. Maybe they even read the owner's manual, because there are folks who do that, but this is how this is supposed to work. And as I think Dom and I demonstrated, while the system isn't outright broken, it got us to all our stops safely. It didn't leave us stranded. It was much more comfortable in the journey to Vegas, because Dom and I made some mistakes. We didn't charge quite enough. The EV9's range estimator was not great either, but we made some mistakes on the way there that caused some very stressful stops. Not at all the case on the way back. The trend we noticed was the car would basically just have us arrive at stations with 35% or more battery, and then charge only a very short time, because we only needed to. The car charged very quickly, but then we just ended up making a lot of stops. I think, Dom, we had 7 stops, if I'm not mistaken, on the way back, as opposed to 3 stops getting to Vegas. Granted, there's an elevation difference, but still huge difference, and it took about, I think, like 2 hours longer.
That's a huge difference.
Yeah, huge difference from 3 to 7 stops. And we've all been on EV road trips, so we know that there are different strategies, not only for planning them, but also executing them, where it's typically, Dom, what is your approach to going long distances? Is it showing up at 35%? Is it charging as many times as you can?
Well, I drive a Tesla Model 3, so basically in a Tesla, you want to get there as low a state of charge as possible. So I like to cruise in at 5% or lower, and then charge until I have enough to get to the next stop with a bit of a buffer, depending on where I am. Some areas of the country, if I feel like you need more of a buffer than other places, like down here in the flatlands I'm in North Florida, so not a whole lot of buffer needed. But if you get out in like West Texas, where it's super windy or maybe there's elevation changes, it's good to have a bit of buffer, so yeah, because sometimes the estimations will change on you when you're already en route.
And to EV9's credit, its built-in system, since that's what we used on the way back for planning our route, actually very accurately estimated the charge we would arrive at and all of those conditions. Of course, we were driving, predictable conditions, 10 miles an hour maximum above the speed limit. So in that sense, it wasn't the hardest job, but it seemed to do it pretty well, accounting for the elevation, for the wind. And I highly recommend people do use that as opposed to just the standard, what we call a guessometer on the car, which is based off driving history. And as we saw on the way there, Dominic, that can just vary wildly. It also has a very high sensitivity threshold, almost too high, with the point where we just couldn't trust it. It would get really optimistic and then really pessimistic But if you use navigation, telling it where you were going, it seemed to have a much better idea of that. So in regards to, I used an EV6 recently, a pretty recent one that I toured in California. The EV9, looking back on our experience, was markedly improved. I still don't think it's good, but definitely I can see there's an improvement. I still would argue, though, I think the biggest issue with the system, regardless of its route planning logic, which wasn't perfect, was just the interface. We had a bear of a time figuring that out, and I think most normal people would, down to things like, the stations that you arrive at going from bottom up in the order, which just made no sense. And there were some comments saying, you guys did it wrong. It's supposed to display the whole option of stations you could go to, and you pick and choose one. One, if that's the case, it wasn't made clear. And two, I think that's wrong because the vehicle clearly was showing us a sequence of chargers to stop at, spacing them out, estimating our charge at each stop, and our time that we would charge at each one. So we were using it as designed. This is how it's supposed to work. But I think people watching it, commenting that, got confused because it didn't show an overview. It showed, Dominic, that we would get there, it gave us a rough time when we get to our destination, but it would only show us 3 to 4 stops. So since we had 7 charging stops, we could never actually see the whole trip because it seemed to have like a window that it would project. So we'd get to one charging station and that would unlock the view of the next one. But that's just how the system liked to do things.
It makes me think about the confidence, because you're kind of saying that, the guessometer, the gasometer, whatever it is, wasn't always maybe accurate. There's a lot of things that play into it. It doesn't seem that maybe it was, seeing the future quite well. Maybe they're building in just too much of, padding in case it's wrong. I mean, do you think that would affect the manufacturer's approach? Because it doesn't seem like it's in the interest of anyone driving this car at this point to stop this many times. I mean, that's not how road trips work anyways.
I can understand the guessometer. It's a very hard issue. I think every car's guessometer struggles because, like you said, Francie, it's predicting the future, how you might drive, how conditions would vary. It doesn't know where you're going. I would say, though, since the navigation was accurate, and actually I was pretty confident in its estimations there, that's no excuse for the route planning, because since it knew where we were going, it should have been able to plan better stops. And I think we could have easily, comfortably avoided at least 2 charging stops on the way back.
Oh, easily, yeah. And then going down to, just to speak to the guessometer's accuracy, we were going pretty predictably, 80, 85 miles an hour, depending on the speed limit. But so it should have a really good indication of how much energy we were using over time. But even when we did stop for like the extra long stops on the way down, we still ended up going 30 miles an hour on the shoulder of the road to try to make it to the next.
Fair, that's Utah. That's extreme conditions with high headwinds.
Sure.
That's what we ran into, which that's the real world. It happens. But yeah, that's the downside of relying on these things. Is you're right, Dom, we were driving predictable conditions, but even though we were maintaining set speed, because this vehicle is also a block, headwinds really killed us in a way that I don't think would have affected, let's say, the Model X or the Mercedes EQS nearly as much, let alone something like a Lucid Air, where it would just sail through.
Right.
Can you tell me more about because you kind of referred to it, Max, but the car that you're driving, and so it's an SUV, which we are seeing more of in becoming electrified. But what do you think about Kia's approach with this one? And I drove it around too. I have said that I think it would be like a really good electric soccer mom car. It seems like durable, it's efficient. I thought it drove well. But what do you think about it?
Yeah, no, you and I had spent, in the past few weeks, we spent a good amount of time with it. I first just want to hear what Dom thinks, because I know he kind of had some initial impressions. Dom, I think you've been in the EV6 before, but this was your first time being in the EV9, right?
First time in EV9, yeah. And my EV6, I think it was pretty short period of time, like 10-minute drive or something, like a test drive at a dealer. I decided just to run down and try to get in there just to try it out like a little bit. EV9. So it looks like you can see on the screen if you're looking at us on a screen. It looks great. It's a great design. And 3 rows, lots of room. Initially, I was really unhappy with the ride. But that was more of a me thing, because I'm not used to riding in a big three-row SUV. So it was, and it's not like a super sophisticated suspension system, so it kind of wafts along. Is a fair amount of depending on the road. If you're on a like smooth road, it drives great. But if you're like on a road with a lot of not bumps so much, it deals with bumps.
Broken
Okay, it's more like
pavement.
uneven pavement and things like that. It'll kind of bounce around. It's a little jouncy, I think it was the word. I found a little bit jouncy, but I think that's probably the best way probably to tune the suspension on this particular vehicle of this size without spending a ton of money, because it has to hit a certain price point. Like this is like it's a pretty, I think it's a really excellent vehicle for what with what they've done here. They've a three-row SUV, but built to a cost. So it's like, I think it starts at right around 50,000 ish. Is that right?
Under, I think, if you get the small battery, I believe it's high 40s. Right.
So that sounds like a lot of money, but in today's market, that's about normal, I think. And plus, it's eligible for the $7,500.
So they're matching it right now. It will be officially eligible once they start building them in Georgia. But at the moment, I believe Kia is basically eating that and passing it on to you. So you effectively get $7,500 off from their dealers right now.
Right. But it's, I like the software is a bit of a mess. We talked about the UI or it's the UI and the UX, everything, like trying to find information. There's just scattered about. I heard there might be an upgrade or update to the information infotainment system. Yep. So maybe some of that's improved. I don't know, but when we were looking at it, it was like. It's really hard to tell. Like for instance, that little gauge is up and down. It tells you like how much you're regenning and how much power you're outputting, depending on what's going on. It would be nice to see like those power levels defined to some extent. There was no calibration, so it's just like
GM will tell you, for instance, the kilowatts that you're consuming or regenning, right?
That'd be great. Yeah.
I don't think I haven't seen many vehicles do that. I don't think Teslas do it. My Polestar doesn't do that. I agree. I would love to see it, but that's unfortunately seems to be like an uncommon thing in lots of EVs.
Right.
It does. We love all the information, so throw it in.
Yeah, it is like the efficiency.
Give all of that to you, and your elevation and all of that. But I really like what you said, Dom, about the suspension, because like. In also what Francie said, right? If this is a soccer mom vehicle, in some ways it feels perfectly calibrated. I don't think most people will be driving this through the twisties of 70, even at the speeds we were, which were not cannonball speeds, but still, with a goal in mind. I think the way this will normally be driven in city and suburban environments will be great. It is a large vehicle. There's no getting around that. And I have to repeat, I don't know, the amount of, I thought it was ridiculous that two of us were driving this all the way to Vegas. Obviously, we were making a point in three-row SUVs, but just if we were in a Lucid Air, we could have consumed, not to say this is inefficient, we could have consumed half the energy, had way more range, easier charging. Just Americans love to drive big cars. But for Americans who do need a big car, this is an amazing one for the money. And the suspension, not sophisticated, but let's look at a counterpoint, right? The R1S that Jordan and Andreas were in, that has very sophisticated air suspension with a hydraulic, interconnected kind of crazy damper system. That has ride issues. They've improved it over the air. I know the second gen's improved, but that's kind of in the other direction where that vehicle has excellent body control. It can be very stiff, but also the ride is sometimes on the bump stops not very good in terms of comfort. So in some ways, Rivian, because they prioritize that vehicle to kind of be a jack of all trades and especially good off-road, it kind of ends up being compromised in ride quality on-road. So I think most normal people who aren't winding it through the limits will probably prefer the EV9 suspension.
That's a good point, Max, is kind of finding the balance, because Rivian is all about being outdoors. Kia, not so much. It's just, an electric car that you can drive around and use in your day to day. Maybe you could take it off road if you wanted. But to me, it doesn't seem like it's totally built for that. It's built for more of a people hauler, which is fine. And that's why we also, I think it's great that you took it on a road trip, because a lot of people think about a road trip when they're thinking about electric. How am I going to get from point A to point B? And you're talking about efficiency there and referencing Lucid as well. And with these stops, with the route planner, the route planner doesn't seem to be calibrated quite right, but I am curious about a few things. The input. So I know some cars you can say, I want to arrive at my next, hopefully you can say when I charge next publicly, I want to be at 10%, 15%, whatever it is, you can pick it. Were you able to customize things like that in the route planner?
We could add stops, I believe. So we could like choose our own stops to add. And we always seem to be able to add like certain points of interest. So we could add another EV charging station if we wanted to. And I think there was a way to remove it. We obviously couldn't for this test. We just had to take it as it was given. But we could, I believe, remove stops. So I think the way that maybe someone who's not comfortable using a better route planner, even though it's actually not that hard, but someone who doesn't know about that and is using the vehicle's built-in system, maybe the way they should use it is use it as designed, but modify it a little bit, remove maybe some of those stops. And the vehicle, as we saw, will do a good job of telling you whether or not you'll reach your destination, leaning towards conservative. I remember it would tell us, even along, I think some of the stops it suggested that we might not make it. So it's extremely conservative on that end. But I don't imagine this would leave you stranded if you're listening to it or paying attention. And oh my gosh, like a lot of Kias, this thing just has so many things and beeps and boops, because if you've got the highway driving assist on or just the normal lane departure system, it's always beeping and booping, and that's regardless of how you drive. It will find things to complain about. And the interior is just a lot, like what Dom was saying with the controls. I think the vehicle has excellent ergonomics from like a physical standpoint, but some of these controls and the interfaces are just really complicated. And this affects, of course, car reviewers and folks like us more than an owner, because I think someone who was leasing this for 3 years or owning this would get familiar with it, and it would become home, eventually. And it's the size of some people's homes, but it is, to someone who's not used to it, especially me coming out of like a Polestar or Dom driving a Tesla, like it is a world of difference in complexity and intuitiveness. And also just the screen's not very responsive. I always see like articles, not to call anyone out, but lots of car journalists like, this system's so responsive. It's like, have you used an iPad? Have you used a Tesla? Do you use your smartphone? Because this was not those levels of responsive.
Yeah,
Right.
where's the benchmark here?
There was definitely lag that was unexpected. I was like, is this, because if you remember, I was like, I had the worst trouble with it because I would tap and then nothing would happen right away. So I'd tap again and then it would end up canceling out whatever I was trying to do.
Breathe, let it slow, let it catch up.
Right. I've never really experienced that in a modern EV before. I was like, so you were saying maybe it's a chipset that they need to upgrade.
It did seem it seemed better than EV6. I would say hardware-wise. I don't know, the exact chipset they're running and everything, but like the screens and everything looked a little better. Like I thought it was an improvement on EV6 in that regard. And like nerd note, it had USB-C, so I could plug in my phone with like the modern cable and not have to use an old-fashioned cable like the EV6. I think until the latest model year made you. So in some ways, it's been updated and modernized. But yeah, the like software and maybe it's the screen they're using, maybe it's the chipset, I don't know. But like there was this noticeable delay. And yeah, like if Dom or I were anxiously tapping because we want to get the next thing, it's just freaked out because it had no idea what to do.
And was this which trim was this again? The long range or the standard range, rear wheel, all wheel?
This was the long range with the large battery, light rear wheel drive. So kind of the ideal road trip spec in many cases. 99 kilowatt hour battery. It actually has a peak charging rate that's slower than the smaller battery, interestingly enough. But it seemed to manage temperature well, especially when they had the energy to precondition. So very hot conditions we were driving in, managed that well. Light trim, I don't know what you thought, Dom, but I was really impressed with the amount of feature content that this had as a base model.
Ventilated seats, we discovered it had. We didn't realize, I think, on the way down, because who would expect, pretty low end kind of
and wireless CarPlay and Android Auto.
Yeah.
Right.
I liked that, especially the seats, which I didn't notice either. I had been driving it around, and then I get some friends who don't drive electric. Excuse me. I'll edit that out. Who don't drive electric sit in with me, and she was like, "Oh, cooled seats." I was like, oh my God, I've been in a heat wave not knowing that I could cool my seats. This is so nice.
But really those good cooled seats too. They're strong.
Yes, they're strong. There's a breeze. It's really nice. And I think generally driving it around, I did think it was a pretty comfortable car. I could see why people who have people to drive around or just want that space or dogs, whatever it is, or who knows, you camp a lot, whatever it is, there's a lot of good space in an EV. And I think a lot of people have been surprised to see, okay, an electric SUV, like this is great. We're seeing real ones out there.
I'm sorry, a question I have for you, Francie, as a dog owner here. I know you only have one dog. We love him, Rafiki. But, like I know Kyle is always talking, complaining. He's like, the R1S, the EV9 is too small because he has the largest dogs in the world and he has 3 of them, but no kids, right? To me, I'm thinking, a couple and their pets, like a mid-size SUV seems like plenty of space for me. But how do you feel, Francie, about space-wise? Because I know you and Rafiki were enjoying the EV9. Like, do you see it as like kind of cool for car camping because it's so long? Like, do you think it's just too big for your needs, or what do you think of that?
Well, it is just me and my dog, and typically like the captain seats, so there's a space in the middle. That's not ideal for dogs because I put in a little hammock and he would had to remember that he can't step in the middle, but that's very specific. And I think there's so much room. I took my friends around in it, of course, and they really liked it. It seemed spacious as a short person as well. Sometimes it's hard for me to see out of cars, but this one, big car, I could see over my blind spot all the way out to the back of the car. It's very great visibility. So I really appreciate that. That can really make me feel like I'm wearing blinders in a car sometimes, and also not really safe. Yeah, driving around a big vehicle. So I did really like that. So not only was it big, had seemingly enough space. I mean, I was essentially living out of a lot of bags for a month. I fit it all in there easy when I had to move things around. And I don't think it was too much space. I think for me, it would be okay, why is she driving that car? Where are her 5 children? But or her 5 dogs, whatever. But I do think it would be great for a family, not too much space. You could camp in it. It doesn't seem like overkill, but I do know that some people also complain about the space in the back seats of some of Rivians is because, they haven't maybe totally utilized all the space or fit some things in and compromise that space. Doesn't seem like that. It seems like a box that is very spacious.
Vibes. It was kind of when you folded the captain's seats down. It was kind of remarkable how many things you could haul in there.
Yeah, and in the back, in the third row too, how much room it is. I don't think I've ever been in a third row that is that spacious. So that's great.
Yeah, and they understood their assignment very well for the American market. Huge cup holders and lots of them. Also, lots of USB ports. So just a very comfy place to be, even in the base model. I like what you were saying, Francie, with the visibility. Very good. I think this was the base model, so it didn't have that really nice Kia feature where when you do your turn signals, it shows you the camera of the lane you're coming into. I don't think this had that. I was just in the EV6 rental, a GT line that had that. That's fine. That's a premium feature. I get that. Though that is a really nice feature, though. And the only manufacturers I've seen do it are Tesla, Kia, Hyundai, and Lucid. And I'm not aware of anyone else who does it. I don't know why. It's an amazing feature.
I do love more cameras. Even the VinFast VF8, if you're backing up, or it just has all surround cameras in the base model, the Eco trim. And parking that makes that really great. Parking the EV9 was a bit harder for me because it is bigger, and then there was no aerial view that was created to see where I am, and I'm parallel parking this new car.
Does improve that, and it does have Smart Park, so it will park itself autonomously. In Boston only. But I do think like if you're living in a city and you don't need this size of car, this is a big car. No getting around it. It's not just because it's an EV. This is a big class of vehicle. So I know Kyle and I'm always going to rag on them. Kyle and Alyssa and their dogs in Fort Collins. Maybe they want all the space they can get. But I think for so many folks, like you live in Denver, you live in Washington D.C., LA, like you might want to look at an EV6, or if you want a smaller, boxier vehicle, something else in class. I will also be really interested to see, in terms of three-row SUVs for folks who need that, Lucid Gravity is coming out. That will be a bit more expensive than this, but if you get the GT line of the EV9, that's also very expensive. I think that's like $70,000. So touching on the base model Lucid Gravity, that brand is really well known for packaging. So I wonder how much space they could fit in, because they have a huge frunk. They're going to presumably have a very good passenger layout, as we've seen in their sedan. That could be really interesting.
That could be a premium option for sure.
Right, and so if you really like get all the options on the EV9, I think it tops out around $80,000, which is where the lucid gravity kind of starts. And I think that's be a tricky decision for some people because the gravity is going to have like great range and super efficiency, and but we don't know about what kind of features it'll have, what kind of content we'll have at the base level. So I don't know. It's hard to say yet which will be more like desirable, but.
I would say props to Lucid, of course, but also Kia here, because the one we were driving was rear-wheel drive, for offering a base rear-wheel drive model. I understand many in the American market think or they need all-wheel drive, and some folks do need it. But for those who don't, or who have snow tires or whatever, rear-wheel drive, a single-wheel drive configuration, single motor, is really efficient. It paid dividends for us. And I think that's a really awesome daily option to have, especially for this vehicle's use case. I was surprised how well this 200 horsepower rear motor, not a meager amount of power, but it's moving a big vehicle, how well it was. It wasn't quick, it wasn't sprightly, but it was perfectly adequate. It felt to me much better than driving some old American large SUV. If you drove, let's say, a base model old Ford Expedition, I feel like that would be a bit, obviously have way less torque, and just it wouldn't have the same pickup as this. And that, I don't mean that in a sporty application at all. I just mean for highway merging and everything. Rear wheel drive was totally adequate.
Yeah, the power levels surprised me. I was really surprised. Sometimes I put my foot to the floor a lot more often than I normally would, but the acceleration was nicely controlled, but it was still brisk enough. You could do all your highway merging and things. I thought it's all anyone really needs in a family situation. I feel like.
If you do live in the Rockies or some kind of snowy environment, or obviously in the case of the Rivian and the Mercedes EQS, which have more off-road ambitions, all-wheel drive has its place. But on the road in temperate climates, rear-wheel drive is, I think, what everyone should get.
Yeah.
So when I think about, the car's pretty decent. I would recommend people who are looking for a bigger SUV EV to really consider the EV9, whatever trim that you're looking for, whatever's in your price range and in your needs. And when it comes to route planning, it does sound like it has work to do. And like you said, if you're not going to use PlugShare or a better route planner, which is as easy as plugging in your destinations, your EV, and letting it plan it out for you, kind of like a road tripping application, is... it is significant that the software isn't horrible, but also I do feel like we're in the beginning. But also, if you're going to get in an EV, driving the Tesla back was so simple from Colorado to Tennessee because it told me exactly where to go the whole way, and I would arrive at a low state of charge. I mean, it just seems like, how long is it going to take to match that kind of approach?
And that's a 6-year-old car, right? That you were driving, Francie.
Yeah.
Well, but not 6-year-old software. That's the key, right?
No, but
it's constantly updated.
2018, it was already pretty good, from what I understand.
Oh yeah, especially that kind of stuff for routing. Yeah, that's because they've been doing that. I don't know. I'm not actually sure if they had routing for 2012 or what, but
I would say a bailout option is, you mentioned, Francie, a better route planner is very easy. And if folks want to get a little nerdy with it, but also make it more powerful, you use it on your phone, plug in a little dongle to the car's OBD port, then you can get the battery status streamed to your phone. So then a better route planner can actually really well integrate with the car, always know what its battery is, and give you, really predictable, reliable data. So that's great. But Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, Apple Maps, and Google Maps both have EV routing at this point. Now, per vehicle modeling per vehicle, that data, I think that's on a manufacturer basis. So Kia or whoever it has to play ball with Apple. Right now, I think the only manufacturer I'm aware of doing it is Ford, I think, with the Mach-E and the Lightning. But right now, what they'll do is they'll pass the battery state of charge and all that info into Apple Maps, and you can let Apple Maps do your EV routing. I think we should cover that more because I don't know how well that works or doesn't work, but I'd be really curious to see how more vehicles might adopt that, because for vehicles like this with lackluster software, almost everyone has a smartphone. And if that works well, if you can put in, I have an EV9 and it shares the battery info, maybe that's a good bailout option.
Yeah,
I think that could be. Yeah. And you do describe it as a bailout option. And I do just hear people argue that I shouldn't have to think that hard. But we are at a point where you still kind of do have to.
But there's a divide too, Francie, because like Tesla and Rivian people, a lot of those, we love them in our comments, are like, the vehicle software should just be great. And I agree, vehicle software matters. We clearly see that in EVs. But folks, especially in gas cars or more primitive EVs from a technological point of view, just who like Apple CarPlay, really like CarPlay. My Polestar has pretty good software, pretty good route planning, Google Maps. I still like to use Apple CarPlay sometimes. Tesla and Rivian don't give their customers that option, but a lot of people really like their phones, and they really like using their phone apps on their vehicle. And, towards the future, when these vehicles run out of data, guess what? They're still going to have a phone with a data plan. So like for a lot of folks, that's really important. And so props to Kia for giving their customers that choice. But I do hope, at least I think a way to Band-Aid their bleeding software issue for their existing customers now is to play ball with Apple or Google and have really good like phone mirroring integration for their route planning.
Yeah, I don't think it did. It wasn't. I don't know if he did much of that, right? Phone integration with the route planning.
It hasn't effectively that I'm aware of. I mean, like
Right,
you can use normal Apple Maps, you can use normal Google Maps, but it doesn't integrate with the battery status and all that.
Yeah, I just remember struggling. I'm on my phone using Google Maps, trying to find chargers, and it was just kind of a mess, But,
Yeah. I mean, it's cool to envision the future where every map has this dynamic data of EV chargers, which, sometimes you can see the prices of gas in gas maps too and know like what to choose. But I like Rivian bought a better route planner as well. So it'll be interesting to see how they integrate that into the software. They are partnering with Volkswagen Group on software stuff. So it's just like these partnerships, these interactions, it makes me think about the future of route planning and how it can hopefully across the board be as simple as some automakers have made it to find EV charging, as also EV charging infrastructure becomes more ubiquitous. Oh, it'd be cool to see. Sounds like the EV9 isn't hopeless.
No, it's a great vehicle let down at the moment by mediocre software and also lackluster infrastructure. Not to say Dom and I had specific Electrify America problems on this trip, though recently I drove the EV6, again, Turo in California for a separate personal trip. And I will say, Northern California, I would expect to have good charging. It was not good. It made Colorado look really for CCS. And so that's a case, obviously, where Tesla has a huge advantage. And so where I think where it will come into effect for Kia and Toyota and everyone who's not Tesla effectively is Iona, right? This huge charging network, which you've done stories for NC on, and I'm sure we'll continue to. This needs to get built out, because if Iona can, get their stuff together, get the charging network in place, the software works, they share the data, station availability, maybe we're close to that Tesla experience. But like you said, so far is everyone trying to kind of catch up to that.
Yeah, jury's still out on Iona. I'm kind of waiting to hear some more details. But
there's lots of money there. They're really serious about it.
A lot of money, yeah.
But
I don't want to know what suppliers are. They're leaning on for cabinets and just charging equipment.
Yeah, and one
I'm
thing for
so interested.
Yeah, for the learners watching this, yes, of course, there's the deal with Tesla Supercharging that will apply. This is a high voltage vehicle, so it won't really charge that quickly on Tesla Superchargers, and the experience won't be that great. And as of yet, Kia and Hyundai have not been granted access. I think GM is just starting to get access with the layoffs. I know that's been going slowly, so who knows when that will happen. But maybe that is a potential alternative for owners too. I mean, look, it's not ideal to get 80 kilowatt charging speed, but if it's that or going 30 miles an hour on the shoulder, then that's better for sure.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, do not recommend going 30 miles an hour on the shoulder.
No.
Do not.
And where can folks see you or someone, who knows, going 30 miles an hour on a shoulder of a highway?
Part one of the Out of Spec motoring road trip where we went from Fort Collins to Vegas. And I know there are many people who are very angry that we were driving on the shoulder. I'm not sure what they wanted us to do. Yeah, I mean, it's unsafe, obviously. We didn't plan on it, but it's not fun.
I mean, it was that or a tow truck, basically, right?
Yeah, and I honestly, waiting for a tow truck an hour and a half in that heat, it would have been survival mode. I'm sorry, folks. I think that would have been more dangerous.
That's what shoulders are for. Emergency situations.
Right. Yeah. just driving on it is a pain because you have also debris and tire rubber and all
we
kinds
weren't
of things.
banking on driving on the shoulder. That was not the plan.
Yeah. No, we thought we was kind of surprised. I ended up hopping the second time, especially. Right.
Yeah.
And it was
I
close,
think
so.
it's a great watch. Of course, they're long videos, but you really get to see what these different larger electric vehicles can do. And, of course, we put them to a very specific testing experience, but I think it's also really entertaining, but also like you can pull some real life lessons from them as well. So yeah, I mean, I appreciate y'all both taking the time to do that race and then ride back and just see what the EV9 told you. And then of course, come onto the podcast and tell us about it. Cause I do think people value this aspect of EVs route planning.
Well, thank you for having us, Francie.
Yeah. And if you, of course, you can see Max on Out of Spec anything really. And then also Dominic, you host the Batteries Included podcast. So I mentioned that at the top in the intro. And then of course, you talk, I mean, you have the shows Friday, live shows, but then also throughout the week, you host other helpful EV focused podcasts.
Right. We do like an EV recommendation show where we recommend an EV for your particular situation called Battery Bargains. So that's generally a weekly series. We missed a couple of weeks, but we're back on track now. And then the odd interview we have with industry professionals, battery makers or automakers or people involved tangentially to the electrification scene.
Love it. Yeah, definitely check them out. Very, very good stuff over there and very helpful for, the consumer, especially with Battery Bargains. I love that.
Between that and the Out of Spec podcast, I mean, y'all have so much content to all you viewers, so enjoy it. And Francie and Dom, you both do a great job.
Thanks, Max. Thanks for
Francie's
being
the
here.
best, really, though.
No, well, thank you. You're,
I always say that.
Great, Tom. Y'all are the best. And viewer, listener, you're the best too. Thank you for tuning in with us. Let us know if you could build your own route planning. What would it consider? And what could you filter? How could you make it perfect? I'm always thinking about my perfect Frankenstein monster of an EV, of all the different parts I would put in. So let me know. Thanks for tuning in for another episode of the Out of Spec podcast. We'll see you next time. Have a great rest of your day. Drive safe, stay charged. Bye-bye.